Hello to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe Ryan, and I invite you to walk with me on the ground of the battlefield of Chancellorsville today. Now, we're not interested so much in the details of the action as we are in understanding the minds of the two generals commanding the armies that came together at this spot and battled each other for more or less for 4 days. And we want to particularly pay attention to understanding the motivation of General Lee in bringing his army to this battle. And at the same time, we need to understand the motivation of Hooker, General Joseph Hooker, in bringing his army to Chancellorsville. And we don't want to ignore, like the Romantic historians and the Civil War writers tend to do, that Hooker remaining inactive when Grant is in the process, as he is, and crossing the Mississippi and crossing the Big Black and moving toward Jackson to get between Johnston and Pemberton and attacking one and then the other. Hooker remained inactive. What an embarrassment that would be to Hooker. The newspapers would be full of Grant and everybody would be asking, where's Hooker? So, as a matter of plain politics, ladies and gentlemen, Hooker had no choice but to move. Now, he plainly did not want to move. Of the approximate 70,000 soldiers that comprised the 6 Union corps that he brought to Chancellorsville, about 20,000 of them were shark-timers. Another 20,000 of them were raw recruits that had just come to the Army after the Battle of Fredericksburg. So, in terms of the hardcore, the seasoned veteran, whose cunning and skill and zeal carries his comrades in the battle, Hooker could count on only about 20,000, 30,000 of his total force to match the fighting quality and intensity of the 40,000 or so that General Lee was bringing to this battle. So as a consequence of that reality, he had no intention, Hooker, in risking his army's humiliation, much less its disintegration. So, the reasonable conclusion we have to come to here, ladies and gentlemen, and when I say reasonable conclusion, I mean the kind of conclusion you'd come to in court. If you were in the jury box and we were in a trial and we were debating an issue of truth, the reasonable conclusion is that General Hooker came to Chancellorsville to stand on the defensive. He didn't have any intention from the beginning of engaging General Lee in a winner-take-all battle. It wasn't going to happen. Now, for General Lee's part, I'm going to try to convince you here by the end of this video, ladies and gentlemen, that he came here because he had no choice. He could not retreat. His mindset was simply unwilling to allow his army to retreat unless Hooker pushed his army to the limit of its physical endurance to stand and fight here, regardless of its inferiority of numbers and regardless of the difficulties of the ground. Now, let's begin. We'll go to Ellies Ford and we'll start there and we'll work our way through 4 days of the struggle that these two armies engaged in. And we're going to pay particular attention to the tactical decisions each general made each day. All right, we've reached Ellies Ford on the Rapidan River. The late afternoon of April 29, 1863, the 3 divisions of George Meade's 5th Corps, Sykes, Griffin, and following some distance behind, Humphreys came to the ford here at the Rapidan and crossed the stream and came out into these fields here and went into camp. At the same time this is happening, 5 miles upstream at Germanna Ford, Henry Slocum, with 2 divisions of the 12th Corps, followed by Oliver Howard of the 11th Corps, comes to Germanna Ford, crosses the Rappahannock, crosses the Rapidan, and goes into camp on the opposite bank, where they spend the night. Now, when they did this, there had been a brigade of Confederates here from Anderson's division, whether it was Mahone or Posey, I don't recall, but it was one of them. And they backed out of here and went back toward Chancellorsville, which is where we started the video. Another Confederate brigade was in front of a ford that's on the Rappahannock River behind us, about 5 miles. The Rapidan goes downstream and it connects to the Rapidan, and then they both flow toward Chesapeake Bay. That brigade also moved out of there and went to Chancellorsville, where the 2 brigades spent the night. And that was the situation in the evening of April 29. Now, when the soldiers crossed this stream that evening, the water level was about 4 feet. And as you can see, this current's moving fairly swiftly along here, and it was the same situation for those soldiers. And the bottom of this stream is not a piece of concrete, ladies and gentlemen. It's a rough, it's got holes in it, it's got boulders in it. And so many of these soldiers, and they have a pack on their back, let's not forget. They got 60 pounds of weight in knapsacks on their back. They got their pockets full of ammunition, and they're carrying a 12-pound rifle in their hands. So a lot of these poor devils lost their footing and were swept away downstream. In anticipation of that, Meade had boats, soldiers and boats, the boats tethered in the stream, so as these soldiers came by, they were grabbed and brought into the boats. To the few that missed the boats and were continued dragged downstream, he had cavalrymen on horses that would wade into the stream and grab them and drag them back out. So while a lot of people lost their footing and a lot of people got swept downstream, not too many of them were killed here and drowned. Now that brings to mind an opportunity to talk about Gettysburg, ladies and gentlemen. Because you know these historians that you spend a lot of money buying books of, they've been telling you for years that the reason General Lee went to Pennsylvania was to cross the Susquehanna River and capture the state capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg. Now, this river, you'd say, is about how wide here? It's about 50 yards, would you say? About 50 yards. The Susquehanna, standing in front of the Susquehanna and Richmond and Harrisburg is across to the other bank. That's 3/4 of a mile wide, ladies and gentlemen. There's no way General Lee's army is going to wade the Susquehanna River. It's got the same height of depth, it's got the same rocky bottom, it's got the same swift current, and it's 3/4 of a mile wide. You're never going to make it to the other bank because you're going to be swept by artillery fire and rifle fire. So the only way you're going to get across this river in June of 1863 is if you got a pontoon bridge. And General Lee left his pontoon bridge at the Potomac. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that he had no intention when he entered Pennsylvania of ever going to Harrisburg, which leaves you trying to understand, well, why did he go to Pennsylvania? All right, let's go on now. We're going to go back to Chancellorsville, and then we'll proceed to our next stop. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back to the Chancellorsville Crossroads. The important thing to understand about this crossroads is that the road over here, the Ellies Ford Road, that takes us to the U.S. Ford Road. And that's why the Chancellor's house, which is the foundation you see in front of us, is here. Because this would have been a major crossroad. People would have been coming from across the Rappahannock. They're going to go south toward Spotsylvania Courthouse in Richmond. They'd be coming from Orange County, coming down the pike, and you know, there was a tavern and a hotel here. Now, on mid-morning of May the 1st, 1863, Meade's Corps, led by Griffin's division, came down the Ellies Ford Road to this location and went into camp. Now, as soon as Meade arrived with Griffin, he ordered Griffin to take one of his brigades and march east toward Fredericksburg. The two Confederate brigades I told you about, Ellies Ford, Posey, and Mahone, they had moved east before Meade arrived. Griffin went down that road about a mile, and he deployed his brigade into line and went forward, straddling Route 3, reaching out for the Confederate resistance, which he came upon. As all that's happening, Henry Slocum with the 12th Corps is coming from the west on Route 3, followed by Oliver Howard's 11th Corps. The head of Slocum's column reaches this location at about 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Now, when Slocum got here, he had orders. First of all, he was the ranking Major General, and so he took command of Meade's Corps as well as Howard's Corps as they congregated here. Remember, Griffin's brigade is out there in the east. Slocum had orders from Hooker that gave him the discretion as the commanding general on the spot to move as far east as he thought it was prudent for him to do so. So it's at this point that we have to talk about Mr. Slocum's inability to take the initiative at a critical moment in the situations as it's unfolding here. Hooker's not here. It's Slocum's call. A messenger comes back from Griffin to say that they've encountered Confederate resistance out there that seems to be stronger than a brigade, so Griffin wants support. He wants a battery of artillery, and he wants another brigade to come out there and support him, and he's going to move forward, and he's going to try to push the enemy out of his way. Now, there's an equestrian statue of Henry Slocum in Brooklyn, and he's high up in his stirrups, and he's got his saber over his head, and you know, he's in all his glory, charging forth like St. George against the dragon. But this is the reality. This is not a myth. Here is reality. Instead of that image in bronze, we got a shadow of it here. And Slocum orders me to tell Griffin to come back. And it's that decision that prevents this entire army from ending up 5 miles further east by evening and establishing themselves way out there in the open ground that we're going to look at in a minute. But he doesn't do that. It's true that you can look in the rebellion record and you can find an order in there to some engineer that suggests that Hooker somehow communicated at the last minute to Griffin, telling him to stop and to wait here until all the corps, including the 2nd Corps, which is at, right now as we speak, on May the 1st, it's at U.S. Ford. Darius Couch's 2nd Corps is going to come down this road, so that by the end of the day we're going to have 4 corps concentrated here. And whether that influenced Griffin's decision or not, it seems to me is irrelevant, because an officer in command of a situation like this, who's on the ground, he's got the force, he could easily have pushed it outward, and he could have driven those two puny little brigades of Anderson's division out of there, and this battle would never have happened. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Orange Turnpike, Route 3. That's the Zion Baptist Church. This intersection down here, as you see behind this sign, that's a critical intersection for the Confederates on May 1, 1863, because the road that comes into it from the north is the Mine Road, and that road runs back toward Ellies Ford. So that when Posey and Mahone of Anderson's division fell back from Chancellorsville, they fell back to this ridge we're on. Now, they didn't fall back because of the ridge, they fell back to cover that road, to keep that road from allowing the enemy to get in their rear. Now, about a half mile beyond the church, running parallel with Route 3 is another road called the Old Plank Road. And these two roads that run parallel to each other extend backward about 4 miles to Chancellorsville, where they converged back in the day. And then they ran along as one road westward for another 3 or 4 miles until they diverged again, with the Old Plank Road going off to the southwest and the Germanna Ford Road going off toward the west. So that's the road net. Now, if you come out here into this area, you're going to be struck by the reality that it's all developed. You're not going to be able to see the original ground as it was. All you can do is pay attention to the space itself, the battle space, the actual contour of the land, the trees, the buildings. None of that is going to give you any landmarks of the real battle. So on May the 1, it was from this location that the Confederates sent skirmishers out to meet Griffin, who was coming from Chancellorsville. So halfway between these 2 points, the two forces in terms of skirmishers, which is a scattering of your soldiers, they basically came together and they shot at each other for a while. It was during that period of time that Griffin sent back a messenger for the artillery battery he wanted and for the additional brigade. And Slocum refused to provide it and ordered Griffin to go back. Had Griffin been supported, he would have been at this location by the morning of May the 2nd. So that when additional Confederate forces came out from Fredericksburg, they would have been facing the Union force between the Old Plank Road and this road at about this location. Now, let's go further west on Route 3 to pick up what happens on the morning of May the 2nd. Because during the night, General Lee has made a decision. He's learned about all these Union forces arriving at Chancellorsville, so he has a choice of retreating. He's outnumbered or standing and fighting, and we've already learned he's going to stand and fight. So during the night he sends additional brigades out here to reinforce the two that are here, and by the morning of May the 2nd he's ordered Jackson to take 3 of his divisions, Rhodes, Heath, and A.P. Hill, and march out from Fredericksburg on the Old Plank Road to join the 2 divisions that have arrived here during the night, Anderson and McLaw. So by the morning of May the 2nd, where we'll pick up the action in a minute, we got two divisions here, and we've got 3 divisions coming from Fredericksburg to meet the 6th Corps that are gathering at Chancellorsville. General Lee in the process has left one division at Fredericksburg to face what it looks like at the time 3 Union Corps, the 1st Corps, the 3rd Corps, and the 6th Corps. One division, Jubal Early, is going to face 3 Union Corps at Fredericksburg, while General Lee, with 5 of his divisions, 5/6 of his entire army, comes out here to deal with 6 Union Corps. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come about a mile from Route 3, which is behind us, to the Old Plank Road and this intersection. Now, Jackson's 3 divisions in column, the front division in line, comes up this road, extending on both sides of it, connecting to McLaw and Anderson's division, which have come up Route 3, a mile and a half in that direction. General Hooker has got his army behind us, and they're entrenching, they're digging in, they're gonna stand there and fight. Now, during the day, Hooker ordered Sickle, Daniel Sickles' 3rd Corps, to march from Fredericksburg to come up to Ellies Ford and come down to Chancellorsville and join. About 9 a.m., 10 a.m., it's May the 2nd. Sickles has arrived at Chancellorsville. Now, General Lee, at this point, has a choice. Same choice he had yesterday and the day before. He can take this road that I'm pointing at, and he can retreat. He still can retreat. At every single moment along the days of this battle, there's never a time that General Lee doesn't have the option to retreat. And on this occasion, the morning of May the 2nd, he can retreat down that road to Todd's Tavern, and from Todd's Tavern he can get to Spotsylvania Courthouse, and from Spotsylvania he can get on the old Telegraph Road and the Fredericksburg Railroad and get to Richmond if he wants. And Hooker knows this. Now, what does he do? It's late at night on May the 1. He's arrived at this very location. And the myth, the storyline is that he has a conference with Stonewall Jackson. They sit on logs in front of a fireplace. It's real romantic. It's warm. And they come up with the idea that Jackson is going to march down this road, which is called the Furnace Road, and he's going to get around behind and to the west of Hooker's lines and attack him from the west. He's going to attack him. And the reality is that it was discussed, and then Stonewall went to sleep. He's a pretty tired fellow. Lee remained awake. He had couriers going out all over everywhere, bringing in local people with information about the road net. He wants to know about all the available roads for such an activity. He sends one of his engineering aides, a guy named Talcott, out into the woods behind us to speak to all of the soldiers that are out there, the pickets, the sergeants, the lieutenants, and all the different units that are scattered around out there that he's put in position to find out exactly where is Hooker's lines. Where are they? How strong are they? How dense are they? You know, poke at them, probe at them, find out exactly where they are, and all that information during the night is coming back to General Lee, along with the local people bringing in information. And by the morning, by dawn, it's General Lee that's made this decision on his own that he's going to take this risk. And what's the risk? He's got about 40,000 troops. He's going to give Stonewall about 23,000. He's going to keep about 13,000. And he's going to let Stonewall on his own march off some 12 miles off to the west to get around behind Hooker. Now, from Hooker's perspective, as far as General Lee's concerned, Hooker is going to think that it's Lee's whole army moving. It's going to be a column of the whole army moving parallel to his defensive position. And the question is, what's he moving for? Is he moving to retreat, or is he moving to somehow attack me? So Hooker is going to be enticed by the circumstances to attack that column at some point along its route. To break it, to get through it, and separate it into two pieces, and then envelop each piece separately. And that's exactly what Hooker does. Hooker sends Sickles' Corps of 3 divisions, supported by the 12th Corps, with Henry Slocum, to penetrate from Chancellorsville, where we were at, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, through the dense woods in front of us, to reach that road, to break into that column, which everybody sees is moving. And once they've broken through it, to get around behind it and envelop it, isolate it and crush it, and then turn and get the other piece. That's what's going to happen all day on May the 2nd. Now we're going to go down the road to the little prop that the National Park Service has left for us called Catherine's Furnace, and we'll finish that story. We're now we've come down about 1 mile from our previous location, and we're on the what they call the Old Furnace Road. Now keep in mind that we can't really say that these roads are in their proper places or not. Some stretches are and others are not. This is a standard charcoal furnace structure. The hill that you see that's covered with leaves is actually has the chambers that are used to shove the logs in and make the charcoal. You can see behind it that the terrain rises to a ridge, and that's about, what, 50 feet? When you get up there, where I've been, it's basically flat land, and it runs back 1 mile, 2 miles toward Route 3, which we were on. And it's across that ground that Sickles is pushing his divisions forward to get onto this road, because the Union signal people, along with all the pickets that are out in the woods feeling for each other's locations, it's very obvious from about 9 a.m. onward that the Confederates are moving a dense column along this road, full of troops. Now, the only explanation for that is, well, it's possible they're retreating. To me, it makes little sense if I'm in Hooker's shoes, because that's a long way to retreat. I'm gonna go about 35 miles in that direction to get to Orange Courthouse. And then from Orange Courthouse, I got to go south to Gordonsville. From Gordonsville, I got to get on the Virginia Central Railroad. Then I got to come back another 40 miles to get to Richmond. Well, all I have to do is, back at that intersection, is go south to Todd's Tavern. So why would I take this long route to retreat? The other alternative is, well, he's moving to attack me. So Hooker, at 9 a.m. on May the 2nd, he sends an instruction to Oliver Howard, who has control of the corps that forms the extreme right of Hooker's army, and he tells him, hey, get your act together over there. It's possible that you might get attacked sometime today. Get ready for it. And Hooker expected Howard to do that. Meanwhile, he's sending Sickles through the woods to get on this road, supported by Slocum. Now, there's a stream called Scott's Run up there. I'll show you some images of. And it is a pretty serious stream back in the day. It passed through a serious ravine, and it created a huge swamp area up there. So as Sickles is moving through the woods with his lines, and these are dense woods. So this is a slow movement forward. He comes upon this swamp, and they have to stop. They have to get the pioneers here. They have to build a log road across that swamp. It takes hours of time to do. Meanwhile, this column's moving, and the Union forces are watching it move. Finally, they get the road built. Then they got to build a bridge over the ravine. So about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, finally Sickles gets to that ridge line. And he's fighting Anderson's division of 4 brigades. And Sickles has got 3 divisions, 12 brigades. So the battle rages till about 3:30 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the rest of the army is aware of this. Hooker's aware of it, Howard's aware of it, everybody's aware of it. Hooker is getting excited now about the prospect of breaking into this road, getting into the woods behind us, and getting around and just totally enveloping, swallowing this piece of Lee's army. So he orders Howard to release one of his brigades, Barlow's, and bring it over here onto the right of Sickles and support Sickles in this last movement to get on this road. So he's weakened Howard's corps, which is already the weakest corps in his army, at a time when he's told him earlier in the morning it's possible he might get attacked. So it's obvious that Hooker at this point in time is totally distracted. He believes it's too late to attack him. And he's gonna give him the coup de grace. He's all excited about that. And it's at this particular moment that hell breaks loose 12 miles over in that direction, which is where we're going to go to next. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come 12 miles in an arc around to the rear, to the west of Hooker's army, which is to the east of us. And down the road, a half a mile or so, is Howard's Corps, which has got 3 divisions. Each division has only 2 brigades. One of those brigades went off with Howard. Howard was so the reason this disaster happens to Hooker on the afternoon of May the 2nd is because Oliver Howard is incompetent. He's committing gross negligence. He's got a serious personality problem with Carl Schurz, one of his division commanders. When Franz Sigel, who was the original commander of the 11th Corps, resigned a few months earlier, Carl Schurz was in temporary command of the 11th Corps. Howard got passed over. He complained to Hooker that he had rank and he deserved a corps. So Hooker gave him command of the 11th Corps, which forced Carl Schurz to fall back down to division command, and Schurz didn't like that at all. So there was a personality conflict going on here, an ego war going on between these 2 men, with Schurz acting like he was the know-it-all. I know everything, I'm the military expert, making Howard feel like, that he's a dummy. So on this particular day, all day long, while Jackson's making this march across the front of the Union Army, Schurz is jabbering in Howard's ear, saying, look, we're going to get attacked from the west. We got to turn all these forces that are in this direction, we got to turn them here to face this direction. We got to bring in artillery in here, like on that hill over there, where those trees are. We got to set ourselves up for an attack. And Howard said, no, don't worry about it, because we're attacking the column over at the furnace. And we're breaking through. Momentarily, we're going to break through. So we don't need to change our positions. And these 2 men argue about that back and forth. all afternoon on May the 2nd. Meanwhile, junior officers are coming in from the outskirts of the field to the headquarters of Howard's Corps, telling them there's enemies out there. The enemy is around behind us. They're in the woods out there. And the Howard's staff officers are simply ignoring them. There's all kinds of reports coming in. This is not a surprise. You read these signs around here talking about how they got surprised. It's not a surprise. It's only a surprise because Oliver Howard, his ego is all vibrating over this personality war he's in with Carl Schurz. And he says, we'll take care of it, no problem. We'll just turn around when we have to turn around. So, as a result of Howard's incompetence, Jackson does surprise Howard. And because the few men that Howard has are not in the right position, Jackson's lines are able to push them back out of the way further down the road, compress them in toward Chancellorsville, where we started this entire exercise. Now, a disaster happens to General Lee here. And that is that in the process of all of this, as the Confederate forces push forward and it becomes nightfall, Jackson is wounded. And that's a disaster. He eventually dies from his wounds. It's also a crisis of command, because the division commanders, A.P. Hill's wounded. A.P. Hill is always out of action at the most important moment. That leaves Robert Rhodes, who's a lawyer. He did graduate from the Virginia Military Institute, and a guy named Henry Heath as the senior commanders in charge of these three divisions, isolated now over here 12 miles away from where General Lee is over at the furnace. And they don't want to assume command. They don't want the responsibility. So now Robert Rhodes does. He's the ranking major general on this side of the battlefield, and he's entitled to command, and he wants it. But all his brigadiers, along with Heath, they're not happy. So on their own, they send a message to Jeb Stuart, who's a cavalryman. He's over at Ellies Ford, we were earlier. And they tell him they want him to come over here and assume command. And he does, to Robert Rhodes' chagrin. Robert Rhodes reluctantly accedes to this. Now, Jeb Stuart did not have anything to do with what happens on May the 3rd, ladies and gentlemen, the next morning. He's a cavalryman. He doesn't have a clue how to handle division-sized forces of infantry, how to organize them, how to put them in line, where to decide, what to decide should be done with what segment, so forth. He doesn't have a clue. He rides horses. He knows how to ride a horse. So what remains unknown in the record today is, did General Lee come over here during the evening of May the 3rd, May the 2nd? There is correspondence in the rebellion record that suggests that he certainly said he was going to come over here. Whether he did or not, the record is silent. But someone other than Jeb Stuart is responsible for reorganizing the lines after the fighting that went on May the 2nd, getting it all organized for the morning of May the 3rd to continue pushing east against Hooker's front. And if it wasn't General Lee, then it was the brigadiers, along with Heath and Rhodes, that accomplished that task. And that line went all the way over, as we said, to the Ellies Ford Road, and it went in that direction, trying to reach out during the day to reconnect with the 2 divisions that are isolated over there at the furnace. So from this position forward, we're going to go back toward Chancellorsville, and then we're going to end up at Salem Church talking about the last 2 days of the battle. Okay, we're on a wood road. Behind us, it intersects with the Ellies Ford road, and if we drove all the way down this road 1.5 miles, we'd come to Route 3. We'd come to the old orange Turnpike. Off to the east of us, about 1/2 mile, would be the extreme left flank of Lee's left wing, a brigade operated by a guy named Colquitt. And Colquitt, he's basically agitating. He's got skirmishers out there, and he's irritating the front of Meade's corps, which is 3 divisions, which on May the 3rd, Hooker's got spread out all along the Ellies Ford road for about 2 miles, a 2-mile front. And the only Confederate force that's in front of it is Colquitt's brigade, and there are some other brigades to his right, but there's gaps between these brigades because these Confederates don't have by any means the numbers to match the numbers against them. So if Hooker had intended to seize the initiative, go over to the offensive, and start using his offensive power, this was the time to do it, May the 3rd. Now, all the historians stopped talking about the Battle of Chancellorsville as if it ended with Jackson's successful attack against Howard's corps. That was not the case. The 3rd day is the battle, and Hooker could have sent his 3,500 cavalrymen, if nothing else, galloping down this road, spilling out onto Route 3 and causing havoc in Lee's rear on his left wing. If he was serious, Hooker could have sent Meade's corps through these woods. A column could have gone down this road at least 1/2 mile and then fanned out of the line, and it could have burst into the rear. That would have totally enveloped Lee's left wing on this side of Route 3. That would have been the end of that story, but he didn't do that. He didn't do that because he came to stand on the defensive, because he lacked faith. Faith in Hooker? No! Lacked faith in the army that he was commanding. Now, there's a good reason for this, ladies and gentlemen. Keep in mind that a year later to the day, Grant is in these same woods at the same spot doing exactly what the historians claim Hooker should have done. And what success did Grant have? Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. If Grant had been here a year earlier on May the 3rd, 1863, instead of May the 3rd, 1864, would the result have been any different? Because remember, just as Lee came to this battle at Chancellorsville without 2 divisions, Longstreet's 2 divisions, which are 100 miles away at Suffolk, he came to the battle against Grant in the wilderness without Longstreet's divisions. So you got to say to yourself, what was so special about this guy called General Lee? What was so special? All right, let's move on. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to Fairview. If Roger, who's helping me here, swings the camera around to look back down to Chancellorsville, I want to orientate you all, ladies and gentlemen, to that's the crossroads we were at earlier today, the Chancellorsville Crossroads. So it's now the afternoon of May the 3rd. Sickles, if Roger follows me back to where I'm at, Sickles, upon Jackson's attack on Howard's Corps, Sickles comes back out of these woods in front of us. He comes into this area. Now, we're not looking at the original terrain. We don't know. There were clearings here, but there wasn't a fairway like a golf course, which is what we got here. But Sickles reforms his line on this roadbed facing west with the masses of Jackson's corps in the afternoon, actually the morning hours, not the afternoon, the early morning of May the 3rd. They're coming down Route 3 and they're attacking our front at this location. Behind us, actually over here where you can see some guns, we have our own artillery lined up. And we wage a battle here between the 3rd Corps, supported by the 12th Corps, which did all the fighting yesterday, against Jackson's 3 divisions for about 3 hours. Meanwhile, off in the woods, on the other side of the furnace, we have Lee with his other 2 divisions, and they're trying to put some pressure on the 2nd Corps, Darius Couch's 2nd Corps, while Sickles is fighting Jackson at this location. After 3 hours of fighting, the Union artillery run out of ammunition. And one by one, the gun limbers and leaves the field. And it's only after that artillery fire gets quieted down that the masses, the Confederate masses, are able to push up to Sickles' front. And at that point, he gets an order from Hooker to fall back from this position to the crossroads. And a little later in the day, fall back another few hundred yards to that intersection that we have between the U.S. Ford Road we were at and the Ellies Ford Road. So by the end of May the 3rd, Hooker's got the 1st Corps and the 5th Corps all along the Ellies Ford Road. He's got the 11th Corps, the 2nd Corps, the 3rd Corps, all over in a semicircle around this area. Now, as this battle winds down and the afternoon of May the 3rd arrives, we finally begin to hear about that last corps that's missing, and that's the 6th Corps under John Sedgwick. It's finally come out of Fredericksburg. It's pushed aside Early's division. It's marching west on the Route 3 to connect up to Hooker here at Chancellorsville. General Lee hears about this, and he immediately takes the 2 divisions he has over at the furnace and he moves them to Salem Church, 5 miles down the road, to meet Sedgwick as he's coming up. And so in the afternoon of May the 3rd, we have Jackson's 3 divisions in front of us over here, which are sliding over around behind those woods over there to form a half circle, basically in this position, while Lee has taken 2 divisions and he's going off 5 miles to Salem Church to deal with Sedgwick. And we'll go there now, which is where we'll end the video. Well, all right, ladies and gentlemen, when we reach Salem Church, if Roger can swing it around, he'll show you the monument of the usual monument of the Confederate soldier on the vigil. And that sort of marks the location where Lee had his line. And if you can see further beyond on the other side of the road, you see another monument similar, which would represent Sedgwick's Corps. So envision in your mind, ladies and gentlemen, a line perpendicular to Route 3 out there, stretching on either side of it. Here at Salem Church, another line half a mile further east, representing Sedgwick's 6th Corps. And then we'll swing around and I'll say something now about General Lee and General Hooker. Remember that analogy that I gave you? I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about this, ladies and gentlemen. The fighter, you know, Muhammad Ali back in the day, how he liked to toy. He just, you know, he'd paw. Remember that? He put that big paw out there, paw at you. Basically just holding you, you know, toying with you. That's General Hooker. From the beginning of this situation to the end, that's General Hooker. He's got the power, he's got the same physical strength as Muhammad, and he's just toying with his opponent in the ring. And you want to laugh, you want to say, oh no, the Confederates was no, General Lee is totally outmanned here. It's just an amazing testament to how some men are so superior to others in certain aspects of their lives. And for General Lee as a soldier, setting Grant aside for the moment, there was just no equal. So here it is, the afternoon of May the 3rd. What has the man done? He's taken 2 of his 5 divisions, about 10,000 men. He's moved them 5 miles away from where we were, down to here. He's left behind 3 divisions to face 6 Union Corps. 3 divisions. Anderson's division is here, McLaw's division is here, but Hill's division, Rhodes' division, and Heth's division left behind. They've taken 4,000 casualties over the last couple of days, so they're down from about 24,000 to 20,000 men, facing 70,000 men in an arc that stretches all the way from the Furnace Road, from Route 3 around to the Furnace Road, up that old plank road we showed you back to Route 3. And then from Route 3, you have to cover about a 4-mile space to the Rappahannock. And in front of you, you have what? You got Heth's division is between Route 3 and the Rappahannock, facing the 11th Corps, the 2nd Corps, and behind those 2 corps is the 5th Corps and the 1st Corps. If you're the other 2 divisions, Hill and Rhodes, you're facing the 2nd Corps, the 12th Corps, the 3rd Corps, and on your extreme left flank, you're facing the 1st and 5th Corps. Now, it's at this point, this situation that I've just described, that Joe Hooker could, standing there toying in the ring, pawing away, can suddenly say to himself at any time, any moment, well, I'm tired of this. I actually understand the situation. I understand what Ryan's talking about in terms of the gaps involved in these different spaces. So why don't I take my 1st Corps and my 5th Corps and swing it around behind the left flank of Lee's divisions left over there on the north side of Route 3. Down that wood road, get on to Route 3 behind them. Attack them while they're isolated. Swallow them up. Why don't I take the 11th Corps and the 12th Corps that are between Route 3 and the Rappahannock and move them this way, east. Push that little division out of the way, Heth's division, push it out of the way. Come in here on Lee's rear with my entire army into his rear, right here, while he's playing around with Sedgwick out here, who's got 4 divisions. He's not going to push Sedgwick out of the way unless Sedgwick himself wants to move out of the way. Why doesn't Hooker do that? because he's just still pawing. He doesn't really want to do that. If he wanted to do it, he'd do it. Now, to end this quick from that point forward, we'll say this about the afternoon of the 3rd. We have Early's division that's come up on Sedgwick's left flank, and he's pushing at him. Sedgwick's got 4 divisions. So 1 division is pushing at him. Lee's got 2 divisions here pushing at him. And they're pushing at him, and they're not getting very far. They are not really hurting Sedgwick much at all, but he's all alone, he's isolated. He sends messages to Hooker, what should I do? Are you coming to help me? Hooker saying, no, you come help me. So Sedgwick says, well, I think I'm going to back up into this bend in the river where Banks Ford is, and I think I'm going to cross the river. I'm going to get on the other side of the bank because I'm all alone out here. And that's how it ends the night of May the 3rd. Now on the 4th, we got another day here, another opportunity for Hooker to change his mind, to stop playing at war and to get real here and take the opportunity that he suddenly is faced with. And that is to try to annihilate these 5 divisions, these 6 divisions of Lee's army, right here, right now, winner take all, destroy it with his force. Instead, he listens to Sedgwick complain about his position, and he does authorize Sedgwick to back up against the river and retreat, withdraw across the river. Now even then it's not over with. Even then he could have ordered Sedgwick to march up the river to U.S. Ford and cross the river and come into the rear of the Union Army and join it. Now the entire army now moves east against Lee's 6 divisions. He could have done that. There's no reason why, frankly. He didn't need to do that. He could have done that, but he didn't. He didn't. The other thing he could have done is, while Sedgwick is here fighting with Lee, moving back toward the Rappahannock, he could have moved his left wing forward against Lee's left flank. Didn't do that. Third thing he could have done is he could have crossed the river himself while he keeps Sedgwick here on this side of the river, come down the bank of the river, cross it at Banks Ford, come into Sedgwick's rear, and join him and fight Lee. Could have done that. But instead, by the night of May the 4th, despite equivocating, one moment he's sending Sedgwick an instruction that authorizes Sedgwick to cross the river, and another moment he's sending him another order, say, wait, don't. I finally decided I'm going to take the initiative. On May the 5th in the morning, I'm going to take the initiative. I'm going to attack Lee. Sedgwick writes him back, says, too late. I'm already crossed the river. So at that point, Hooker says, well, all right, I'll have to cross too. I'll pick another field, another time. And the only reason he tells us he's leaving a field is because he's out of supplies. And that basically brings us to the end of the battle, the end of the day. And General Lee has achieved his objective. He's still here. He's still standing here. And in 30 days, he's on the move to Gettysburg.
Mist-covered mountains are a home now for me, but my home is the lowlands, and always will be. Someday you'll return to your valleys and your farms, and you'll no longer burn to be brothers. Thank you.